My parents handed my sister the keys to a luxury apartment and smiled. Then they turned to me and gave me a crumbling house with broken walls, leaking pipes, and one clear message: this is all you deserve. They thought it was the end of my story. It wasn't. When families talk about fairness, they don't always mean justice. In my case, favoritism wore a shiny disguise. While my sister moved into a brand new apartment, I was left with a house everyone called worthless. What they didn't know was that this neglected place would rebuild more than walls, it would rebuild me. At first, I truly believed gratitude was the right response. That's what we're taught growing up, that good children don't complain, that respect means silence, and that questioning your parents is a kind of betrayal. So I nodded, smiled, and said thank you, even as something heavy settled in my chest. I told myself that comparisons were childish, that fairness looked different in every family, and that I should be mature enough to accept whatever was given to me without resentment. But reality has a way of refusing to stay quiet. The difference wasn't subtle, and it wasn't something I could explain away with positive thinking. My sister's apartment felt like a celebration. It had security at the gate, elevators that opened smoothly, walls that smelled of fresh paint, and sunlight that poured in without effort. Every family visit there came with praise and laughter. Relatives took photos, complimented my parents, and spoke proudly about how well my sister had been set up. It was a place filled with voices, approval, and visible love. My house, on the other hand, greeted me with silence. The floors were cracked in ways that caught your feet if you weren't careful. The ceilings carried dark stains from leaks that had clearly been ignored for years. There was a faint smell of dampness that no amount of cleaning could fully erase. When family members visited, they didn't linger. Conversations were short, eyes wandered, and the same people who applauded my sister suddenly found reasons to check the time and leave early. No one congratulated me. No one called me lucky. Each visit cut a little deeper than the last. I started to notice how casually the imbalance was discussed, as if it were obvious and unquestionable. You're more practical, they'd say. You can fix things. Or worse, at least you have something. Those words landed like quiet judgments, suggesting that my role in the family was to manage hardship without acknowledgement. I wasn't meant to shine, I was meant to endure. That's when the realization hit me this wasn't about property. It was about position. I was the extra child, the backup, the one expected to accept less without asking why. Gratitude, in this context, wasn't a virtue, it was a muzzle. It kept me from naming the hurt, from admitting that what I felt wasn't jealousy but grief. Grief for the fairness I thought existed. Grief for the version of family I believed I had. I tried to ignore it, to swallow the ache and move on. But silence has weight. Living in that house meant confronting the message every day. Each cracked tile reminded me of how easily my needs were overlooked. Each empty room echoed with the absence of encouragement. And slowly, painfully, I understood that pretending not to see the difference was costing me more than admitting it ever could. That moment didn't make me angry. It made me honest. And honesty, for the first time, gave me something gratitude never did. A sense of clarity. I cried the first night I slept there, not because the house was old, but because of what it symbolized. The silence felt heavier than the cracked walls, louder than the dripping faucet in the kitchen. Every corner of that place seemed to whisper the same message I'd been hearing my whole life: you were an afterthought. I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling where paint peeled like old scars, wondering how something given so carelessly could hurt so deeply. It wasn't just a house. It was a verdict on my worth, stamped and handed over without a second thought. Then something shifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, the way real change usually begins. The tears stopped, and in their place came an unfamiliar feeling, anger mixed with clarity. I realized I had been waiting my entire life for permission. Permission to be seen. Permission to matter. Permission to believe I deserved more, and in that moment, it became painfully clear that permission was never coming. The next morning, I picked up a hammer. I didn't know what I was doing. I watched videos, borrowed tools, asked strangers for advice, and made mistakes that cost time, money, and pride. I tore down a wall I later learned was important. I painted rooms the wrong color. I installed things backward. Some days I stood in the middle of the mess and wondered if everyone else had been right about me after all. But I kept going. I learned the language of effort, the weight of tools in my hands, the satisfaction of fixing something that had been broken for years. Each failure taught me something no one in my family ever had: patience with myself. Every repaired wall became proof that I didn't need permission to build a life worth living. I wasn't fixing a house anymore. I was undoing years of doubt, one nail at a time. As the house slowly changed, so did I. The work gave me something I had never been given before: control. If something cracked, I fixed it. If something was ugly, I changed it. For the first time, my progress depended on me, not someone else's approval or comparison. And with every small improvement, the shame I carried began to loosen its grip. There were nights when exhaustion replaced tears, when I fell asleep sore but proud. The house no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like a partnership. It met me where I was, and grew as I grew. What once symbolized rejection became evidence of resilience. I learned that being handed less doesn't mean you become less. Sometimes it means you're forced to discover how strong you already are. By the time the house started to look like a home, I had changed in ways no one else noticed, because the transformation that mattered most wasn't visible from the outside. I no longer waited to be chosen. I chose myself. And that decision, more than any renovation, was the foundation that finally held. Months turned into years, and the change didn't happen overnight, or all at once. It came in quiet stages, in dusty afternoons and exhausted evenings, in small victories no one else saw. A repaired leak here. A strengthened beam there. Fresh paint covering stains that once felt permanent. Each improvement carried more than physical weight. It carried proof that persistence, even when unnoticed, still moves things forward. The house began to breathe again, and so did I. At first, the progress was easy to ignore. People were used to seeing me as the one who got the leftovers, the burden, the afterthought. A few repairs didn't fit the story they'd already written about me. But as time passed, the transformation became impossible to deny. The walls stood straighter. The rooms felt warmer. Light found its way into places that had once been dark and forgotten. Slowly, the house stopped looking like a mistake and started looking like intention. That's when the tone around me changed. Relatives who once smirked during family gatherings began asking casual questions that weren't really casual at all. How much did it cost? Who helped you? Are you thinking of selling? Their curiosity carried a hint of disbelief, as if they were trying to understand how something they had written off managed to survive, let alone thrive. Compliments replaced jokes, but they felt oddly hollow, arriving only after the results were visible. My parents noticed too. At first, it was subtle. A longer glance, a comment about how nice things were looking. Then came the sudden interest. Offers of advice that were never there before, the visits that felt more like inspections than concern. They spoke as if they had always believed in me, as if the years of dismissal had somehow rewritten themselves. But I remembered every silence, every shrug, every moment they chose not to see me. By then, the house was no longer just a project. It was a timeline of my growth. Every room held a memory of doubt turned into discipline, of exhaustion turned into resolve. I didn't just fix broken floors and crumbling walls. I learned how to trust myself when no one else did. I learned that approval loses its power when you stop needing it to move forward. What surprised me most was how little their attention mattered in the end. The praise didn't feel rewarding, and the interest didn't feel comforting. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. I no longer wanted validation from people who only showed up after the success was visible. I had already lived through the hardest part alone, and that solitude had strengthened me in ways their support never could. The house stood as proof, but it wasn't the greatest achievement. The real renovation happened quietly, internally, without an audience. I had rebuilt my confidence, my boundaries, and my sense of worth. And once that kind of self-respect is restored, it doesn't crumble again, no matter who finally decides to admire it. When they finally noticed my success, everything about their tone changed. The calls came more often. The messages were warmer, almost nostalgic, as if the past could be rewritten by pretending it never hurt. They spoke with pride now, using my achievements as proof of their good parenting, even though they had watched me struggle in silence for years. What they wanted wasn't a conversation about the pain or the imbalance or the damage that had been done. They didn't ask how it felt to be overlooked, dismissed, or quietly humiliated. They simply wanted to step back into my life as if success had erased the need for accountability. There were no apologies, only assumptions. Assumptions that automatically meant access. That because I had built something valuable, they were entitled to stand inside it. They wanted invitations, involvement, opinions, and benefits. What they never offered was responsibility for the years I spent believing I was worth less. It became painfully clear that their interest wasn't rooted in love or reflection, but in proximity to what I had created. They didn't want to acknowledge the emotional cost of their choices. They wanted the comfort of pretending those choices had worked out just fine. For a long time, I wrestled with guilt. Walking away from family is not a decision you make lightly. I questioned myself constantly. Was I being too harsh? Too sensitive? Was success supposed to soften old wounds instead of sharpening them? But every interaction left me drained, reopening spaces I had fought hard to heal. I realized that allowing them back without accountability meant reopening doors to the same patterns: minimization, favoritism, and quiet disregard, just dressed up in pride this time. So I chose clarity over chaos. I chose peace over performance. Walking away wasn't an act of revenge or bitterness. It was an act of self-respect. I understood that boundaries are not punishments, they are protections. I had spent years renovating more than a house. I had rebuilt my confidence, my independence, and my sense of worth brick by brick. Letting people back in who refused to acknowledge the damage they caused would have meant undoing that work. I didn't renovate a house just to live in emotional ruins. I didn't strengthen walls only to let old wounds collapse inside them. The space I created was meant to be safe, honest, and grounded in mutual respect. And sometimes, protecting that space means accepting that some people only value you when they can benefit from you. Walking away wasn't losing my family, it was choosing myself for the first time, without apology.